as the population of Sydney was rapidly growing. The old Devonshire Street Cemetery in Sydney had to make way for a fast-growing city. More burial land was urgently needed for the people of Sydney. The land had to be at a proximity between Sydney and Parramatta. New land was purchased in 1862 at Haslam's Creek, some 11 miles west of Sydney. Haslam's Creek Cemetery was established in 1867, only to be changed 10 years later to Rookwood Necropolis. Rookwood is the largest Victorian cemetery in the world and still working. It is 2.10 kilometers long and 1.8 wide. It is also the largest recreational park in Australia. A Victorian influence, Anglo-Saxon and Celtic origins. People of all denominations and cultures has inherited the necropolis from all different parts of the world. The old Catholic chapel of the Archangel St. Michael, built in 1890 using Piedmont sandstone. High up on the bell tower is the new bronze angel of resurrection, replacing the previous stone statues destroyed by lightning strikes. The old Roman Catholic Mortuary 1 section is seen from above, with Lidcombe train station nearby in the background. Old family vaults and crypts of Gothic revival and Victorian architecture, believed to be the oldest in the necropolis. It's a marvel of architecture carved in stone by master stonemasons of Victorian era. Fortunately, these monuments have stood the test of time, while others have fallen into disrepair, negligence and vandalism. Stone monuments and statues are a silent tribute and testament of their makers. The Celtic cross is a symbolic icon of the Irish Christian faith during earliest colonization by British and Irish first settlers. Many men and women who lived for their faith lay in rows behind St. Michael's Chapel. In 1869, twice daily, a funeral train left Sydney Central Mortuary Station, and as it reached Haslam's Creek Station, now it's Lidcombe, it backed up on a branch line and proceeded inside the necropolis, passing exactly along this route, lined both sides with Italian family vaults where the loved ones are now resting, resembling little houses in a narrow European street. The Mortuary Station 1 can just be seen at the end of the road. The train slowly proceeded along the branch to make the extended stops at the 3 intermediate stations. It was a beautiful mortuary station of excellence in architecture and design. It was designed by James Barnett, famous Sydney architect. This beautiful building closed down in 1948 after 80 years of service. Later, after its closure, the mortuary station was badly burned by vandals destroying the ornate wooden trusses and roof completely. It was decided to dismantle the ornate building stone by stone. It took more than 90 semi-trailers to transport the entire building. It was fully reassembled in Canberra and was named the All Saints Anglican Church at Ainslie. The excavation reconstruction of platforms of that magnificent building is all that remains. The beautiful statuette of Bridget, carved in marble with sleeves rolled up. The Wesleyan section is the closest to East Street and the oldest in the necropolis. The gardens were elaborately designed to be the most striking in the cemetery. But with the ravages of time, these elaborate gardens faded away due to lack of regular maintenance and neglect. The Wesleyan Cemetery, apart from the tranquility and peaceful existence, is the many significant headstones of extraordinary people. George J. Alkin, of whose headstone rests a fireman's helmet, carved in stone. Quoting Tong is a beautiful sandstone shrine memorial, a cupola on 4 columns with a large offering sandstone pot. Built in 1877, it's dedicated to a Chinese community whose task was to exhume Chinese remains from this old Chinese burial ground and send back to their homeland China. And close to the shrine, a magnificent bronze lantern-like monument, used by visitors as paper money, was burned as offering to their dead. The monument of B. Miles, an eccentric well-known Sydney woman, is said to have asked a taxi driver to take her to Perth, Australia, some 4,000 kilometers. When they finally arrived safe in Western Australia, she paid him fully. The old Presbyterian site has to be my favorite. It's a burial garden of peace and tranquility, where the stone can tell us stories of the triumphs and tragedies of various success that made our nation what it is today. I always get a weird and sensational feelings during my frequent visits to this site. Famous Fraser's Vault is the largest 19th century mausoleum in Rookwood. It was built in 1894 using Sydney Piedmont sandstone. It is a Byzantine and Gothic in design. The stained glass windows all been smashed by vandals, and as one could see, has become a shelter for pigeons, and this is where I get its nickname, the Pigeon House. And close by is the John Paul Family Vault, with an unusual copper dome heavily dented by a hailstorm. Tall and magnificent monuments, an expression of a gift and memorial to their family departed loved ones. Surrounded by elaborate wrought iron fences to keep intruders out. Some families really meant business, as this original chain railing, having long sharp spines at each of the links. It is an original, and is the only one I have seen. The hourglass and wings, a symbol of young life departed early into the heavens. The anchor is a symbol of hope and steadfast. A sea of tall standing stones. We can all discover secrets when communicating through symbols. All it takes is an interest to learn, and time to let them speak to you, while offering interesting insights into someone's life and time. Like two best mates, leaning onto one another for support. The elaborate and complex serpentine canal system, draining stormy waters into the nearby Parramatta River, an engineering feat of the 19th century. We can now take a bird's eye view by hovering above Section 3 of the Old Church of England section, with vaults and monuments of great historical significance. The ancient period was 19th century Victorian. The architecture of tombs is of classical and Greek and Gothic style. Elaborate sandstone crypts, mausoleums and shrines that houses the deceased. Buildings like temples and cathedrals, built for wealthy families and the elite. One fine classical example is the Watson Mausoleum of a Gothic revival design, built during 1900. This relief art on a family mausoleum, rarely seen anywhere in Rookwood, is in desperate need for restoration. With funding desperately needed, many projects like this beautiful garden pond were brought back to life after many decades of neglect. Rookwood, in contrast, from a little oasis to a desert of graves. The Anglican Cemetery is the second largest in the necropolis after the Catholic Cemetery. In my opinion, it is the most popular by visitors, not only for its historical monuments, but for its natural beauty, with soft and golden coreopsis and tall kangaroo grass, weeping from side to side with the breeze. The most loved and visited building is the former Old Church of England office, later got nicknamed the Elephant House, and was fully restored after many years of neglect. And close by, the recent restoration of the old Gravedigger's house. Men of HMS Nelson were buried here between 1885 and 1888. HMS Nelson was launched in 1814 as a man of war in England, a 3-decker with 120 guns. The vessel claimed to be the largest wooden ship of that era. In 1865, Nelson was given to the colony of Victoria as a training ship and sailed to Australia in 1867. After more than 100 years in service, the Nelson was sold in Hobart and broken down in 1920. Falling monuments that lasted many decades, fallen by the ravage of time. Now let's look at some symbolic secrets carved in stone. Wander any cemetery and you will discover a secret language communicating through symbols. All it takes is the interest to learn what each generation wished to imply with this language, and the time to let them speak to you while offering interesting insights into someone's life and time. These two symbolic monuments represent time of resurrection into heavens by the angel of resurrection and the guardian angel. Nothing in my hands I bring, simply to the cross I cling. A verse taken from the hymn Rock of Ages. A seashell conch left on the grave after a loved one made a pilgrimage to visit the grave. The original gates and pillars from Sydney's first cemetery at Devonshire Street, 1820, where a central station now stands. All Souls Anglican Chapel, former Church of England, built in 1926 of an Art Deco architecture. Land for the new cemetery was purchased in 1862 and was described as pristine Cumberland woodlands, supporting plant communities with native trees, shrubs and open grasslands, with many species of flowering herbs and native grasses. Over many decades, much of this natural habitat were discriminately burned and bulldozed to make room for burial plots. Some small patches of remnant bushland remains, although heavily impacted by surrounding burial grounds, overgrown with an invasive native shrub gone rampant, smothering and destroying open grasslands, threatening many species of flowering herbs and grasses. It is also a refuge for many birds and reptiles. The beautiful St. Athanasios Greek Orthodox Cemetery in Rookwood Parish Church. This parish church has a devoted Greek Orthodox community followers and administer weekly services of remembrance of the dead and other celebrated holy feasts on calendar. This area is set aside for Serbians, Ukrainian, Orthodox and other Europeans, overlooked by the beautiful blue and golden Orthodox shrine up on the hill. The Armenian Christian cross with the 8 Beatitudes points and the Armenian Cemetery shrine. During the 1920s and up to the 1970s, some 30,000 babies and infants were secretly buried in this unmarked grassy site, of whom many died in Sydney hospitals. It was not so long ago when the secret was uncovered and made public news, and to many thousands of mothers who lost their children and babies. Mothers can now visit their little babies, can hang a little sparkling golden star with child's name, and occasionally leave behind a little angel for their protection. The Catholic Sacred Heart Chapel was built in 1928 and restored in 2011. The Crown of Thorns Shrine was erected in 1972 in memory of the souls of the departed whose bodies are buried in the cemetery. Rookwood is truly a magnificent resting place for the departed people of our city. It is the largest recreational park in our city. Peace, tranquility and natural beauty is what attracts many people to visit and explore mysteries and secrets of the telling stones. His passionate paleontologist and his favorite hammer tool that has followed him to his grave, and a replica of a German soldier's helmet who was a doctor during World War II. An expression of grief and sadness of a missing loved one. During World War II, some 400 Americans who were killed in the Pacific War or died in Australia were buried here. During 1947, all bodies were exhumed and taken back to their homeland, the United States. The site where the flagpole stood still remains to this day. This beautiful stone tells us about heroism of a mariner on the high seas and lost his life at sea. Here lies a true fallen Anzac of the 4th Battalion who sacrificed his life fighting in Gallipoli and Europe during the First World War between 1914 and 1918. He was only 33, another Anzac hero. The Commonwealth War Graves of Australian forces who've died and gave their lives for our freedoms during the First and Second World Wars. Established in 1945. 393 First World War soldiers and 253 Second World War are buried here. The Garden of Remembrance, with 73,500 plaques with inscriptions of men and women who died in all conflicts around the world. There's quite a contrast between the 19th century dilapidated graves to the luxurious apartments for the dead of the 21st century. These magnificent monuments are some of the oldest in Sydney, a classical Gothic and Victorian revival architecture, crafted by the hands of our first Sydney earliest stonemasons. Prior to the 1920s, these tall stones and monuments were located at the St. Thomas Becket Roman Catholic Church Cemetery in Lewisham, and in the 1920s were moved to Rookwood Cemetery, as more land was needed for a hospital and a railway extension. Entering the Islamic burial grounds is like walking inside a paradise garden. Families of the dead has created natural monuments not with elaborate stones, but with tall palms, scented flowers, and fragrances of fruiting trees. The Islamic people believes there is many palm trees in paradise. The Chinese World War II pavilion, where many Chinese families had gathered to pay respect for all those who died in the war, to pray and to share food that has been blessed. A sea of Chinese family monument graves and red granite. And close by is an older Chinese grave section with worn down smaller traditional headstones from the 19th century. Peace and tranquility of the Methodist and Lutheran burial grounds. Many of the graves date between the late 19th century to the 20th century. Tall and elaborate Italian family crypts of black marble, to a Corinthian temple-like housing the dead. Houses like crypts with colorful stained glass doors. Opened in 1925, the Memorial Gardens and the Crematorium is the oldest and longest serving in Australia. It is said to be of a Spanish mission-style building in the form of a crucifix pattern to accommodate the three chapels. The fascinating and spectacular Memorial Gardens. One can easily see the unique design of the gardens from above. It's a must to visit, especially between October and November, when thousands of roses are in full bloom. Many families have been planting roses by the graves of their loved ones since Rookwood opened in 1867. Many of the roses has acclimatized to Rookwood climate and produce unique hybrids not to be found anywhere else. Rookwood roses are now being protected and maintained by the Volunteers of Heritage Roses in Australia Corporation. Built in 2002 is the magnificent Mausoleum of Resurrection. A spellbinding classical and modern architecture. From the fascinating garden landscaping to a modern and dramatic interior, with natural sunlight reflecting inside the chapel, and all other interior lights and elevators powered by the sun. A mosaic of many Jewish graves that lay side by side. A broken column represents life cut too short. The urn, a symbol of mourning, the body as a vessel of the soul, a repository for the ashes of the dead. Hands of a temple priest with the 7 candlestick menorah and the Quran. A Jewish custom is for visitors to leave a visiting stone on the grave at each visit, to let them know that they are not forgotten. This burial ground is of a significant and historic site of the Jewish community. Many of the tombs are unique of old Jewish architecture. Dates between 1837 and 1984. Some 105 tombs has been transferred from the city cemetery, which has been cleared to build Central Railway Station in 1901. Extensive tomb restoration was carried out between 2009 and 2010 by the National Trust of New South Wales. And who is to forget the murder of 6 million Jewish men, women and children by Hitler and his Nazis during World War II in many concentration camps throughout Europe. May the world never again witness such inhumanity of men against men.